Hi everyone, my name is Riley, and I have so much guilt on my shoulders. I just thought that maybe if I share my story, it will make me feel a little bit better. Most of the worst events in our life tend to happen by accident. Stupid accident. Little did I know that my innocent teenage prank would ruin my family forever. You definitely wouldn't call us a perfect family from the very beginning. My father was always really rough and a very narrow-minded person. He has worked at a car service station for his whole life, and it was clear that it was hard for him to manage our family, which was the reason for the constant bickering and arguments between my parents. My older brother Hunter had to deal with his school studies and help our father at the car service station at the same time, but he never complained about it. As for me, never-ending housework was my daily routine. We all tried to do our best, but my mom was never satisfied. I think she has always dreamt of a better life for herself. Anyway, despite all of this, we were a family. But then something happened. My father left town for a couple of days because he had to get some new equipment and tools or something. He was so excited. He kept saying he had a big order that was going to bring in a lot of money. His partner had a van, so it was one of those really rare times when my dad didn't use his own beloved car. And for the record, it was the most and only expensive thing we ever had in the family. Hunter and I would have killed to take it for a ride, and now we finally had the chance. I begged him to go out for a drive, just a little one. It was so tempting, but Hunter insisted it was far too risky, so we agreed to not touch the car under any circumstances. But as you might have already guessed, I broke this promise. Late at night, I texted my friends and suggested that we go have some real fun, and it didn't take me long to convince them. I had thought it all over. Hunter had gone over to his girlfriend's house, and my mom was sleeping soundly in her room. I stole the car keys, and my friends and I quietly snuck it right out of the yard. We were like ninjas. Once we got far enough away, we just drove faster and faster. I felt like I was as free as a bird. And then, boom! The car hit something in the dark and we lost control. When we finally managed to stop and catch our breath again, we realized that the car had been damaged. Really bad. I was devastated and scared to death. What had I done? What would I tell my mother? I knew she would be furious. Not to mention my dad. What on earth was I thinking? We put the car back in the garage. Of course, my friends said they were really sorry and stuff, but I knew that there was no amount of regret that could help me now. I had nothing more to do but just sit next to the car and cry. Soon afterward, Hunter got back home and walked up on the scene. He was really mad at me at first, but he was never able to stay angry for a long time. He calmed me down and said, "I will handle this, don't worry." He thought that the only way to save me was to try to fix the car at the service station before anybody could figure out what had happened. Dad wasn't going to come back until the following evening, and there was not much time left. Hunter quickly got in the car and drove away. I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I texted my brother like every 5 minutes, but he was really busy over there, of course, so he didn't reply to me. Finally, the morning came, and my brother still hadn't come back home. I was getting really worried. My mom didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary because she thought Hunter was still in bed. We were having our breakfast when I heard police sirens wailing somewhere far away. It was nothing special, but for some reason, my heart sank. And suddenly my mom got a phone call. She was listening to the person speaking for a few seconds and then fainted. There was an accident at the car service station. It had completely burned to the ground, and my poor brother Hunter was there. They never managed to find out why or how it had happened. Was it a gas leak, or had Hunter done something to cause the explosion? Anyway, I lost my brother, and I was the only one to blame for his death. Nothing really mattered anymore. Of course, I told my mom, dad, and the police the whole story right away. And my parents were not just furious or mad at me, they actually started to hate me, for real. Dad said he never wanted to see me again. He said I had killed Hunter, and there was no forgiveness for me, ever. and I knew he was right. So I decided to leave home and run for the hills. Maybe deep inside, I hoped that my parents would stop me or look for me. But that never happened. I just walked and walked for what seemed like forever. I slept on park benches in the streets, stole food from supermarkets, and I kept hoping. But it seemed like nobody really cared anymore. 1 week passed and I decided to go back home because I had no other place to go. When I saw my house, I literally almost burst into tears. The front door was open and I worked up all my courage and went in to find that the house was a complete mess. My father was sitting on the sofa and didn't even pay attention to the fact that I had returned. It looked like he had aged 20 years in that week. And my mom, she had just left forever. My father didn't know where she had gone and didn't care much, really. He also didn't care if I left or stayed either. As for me, I had no choice. 2 years passed. My dad lost his job and started drinking a lot. I actually didn't really see him sober over those 2 years, and we almost never talked anymore. I still believe that I deserved to be treated like this, so I took things as they were. I got a part-time job and I was determined to finish school. I did everything I could to stave off any suspicion that there was something wrong in my family, but nothing can stay buried forever. One day, my dad disappeared. Yeah, I had gotten used to his periodic absences, but days had passed and he still hadn't returned. 2 weeks later, there was no doubt that something had happened. There was nothing else I could do but go to the police. The police were shocked, mostly because an underage kid had spent so much time abandoned and alone. Child care services took me away immediately. My father had not been found yet, so they started looking for my mother, which was still the biggest question for me. She just left us without saying a word or even leaving a note. They finally found her. My mother was born in Mexico, and this is where she had run off to. She said she was not coming back to America to get me. She just abandoned me. I've never felt more miserable and lost in my life. Of course, I knew I did a horrible thing, but hadn't this gone on long enough? I didn't actually kill Hunter. It was an accident after all. Soon afterward, my father was found dead in a river. He must have been driving drunk and lost control. Of course, I was really upset, but I wasn't surprised. I had to spend a year with a foster family before I turned 18. I was not afraid of adult life. I mean, I have seen things, but I still didn't have all the answers. How could my mother just let me out of her life so easily? There was only one way to find out. I got her address, bought a plane ticket to Mexico, and hit the road. My mother lived in a nice small village there. The people around were growing the crops and herding cows. I kept thinking that she must have had a peaceful life there. My heart started fluttering like mad when I finally found the right place. I saw an old, run-down house, and there was an old woman sitting still on a bench close by. It was almost impossible to recognize her, but it was my mother. I couldn't believe my own eyes. It had been only 4 years, and she had gotten so old so fast. I asked her if she remembered me. She gave me a quick look, and I realized she didn't have the slightest idea who I was. Her eyes looked crazy, and she started to mutter something. I managed to understand she was talking about Hunter. She was staring out into space and telling me a story about how she had lost her beloved son because of this nasty girl, who also happened to be her daughter. She was shuddering in anger when she spoke about me, and she was telling me the story as if I were a stranger. It was obvious now. She had completely lost her mind. Well, I think I got what I deserved. There is no way I can ever get my mother, my father, or my brother back. This is how we sometimes pay for irrational actions and careless decisions. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I've learned my lesson.
Hey guys, my name's Chris. Recently, I had to choose between who goes to prison, my dad or my brother. But I'm 13 years old. How could I even make that choice? We lived a normal life. But when I was 10 years old, my mother died, and our family changed a lot. We mourned her for a very long time. Dad was falling apart and couldn't deal with her death, so he started drinking. And then everything went wrong. He was fired from his job and was barely making any money. And almost all the money he did make, he spent on alcohol. It was terrible when he got drunk. His mood was like a roller coaster. At first he would cry, then scream, and get angry. Then my brother Bruce took on the role of father in our family. He always protected and cared for me. For 3 years we struggled with misfortune, but things got better. We talked a lot with my dad, and he started drinking less. Bruce turned 18 and found a good paying job. We had hope for a normal future, but one night, everything got turned upside down. One day on a weekend, Dad got us a surprise. He had bought tickets to a baseball game. Hooray! We were going to spend the day like a normal family. Dad took us to the stadium and we watched the game. Bruce and I were so happy, but it couldn't have been that good. Dad ended up meeting his friends and left us to watch the game with them. We agreed to meet near the car in 2 hours. But when our game ended, our dad never came. We tried to call him, but he wouldn't answer. We stood by the car for over an hour, and he finally showed up. He could barely stand on his own 2 feet. Apparently, he had gotten drunk with his friends. It really pissed Bruce off and ruined his evening. He took Dad's keys and said he'd drive us himself. We got in the car and drove off, but Dad was aggressive. He kept telling Bruce how to drive, and it was really annoying him. They were fighting and yelling at each other. I didn't want to hear it, so I just closed my eyes and put my hands over my ears. But then it felt like the car jumped, and when I opened my eyes, the last thing I saw was the windshield breaking. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. I raised my head and saw my brother. He was sitting next to me, covered in scratches and bruises. I was immediately frightened, but he calmed me down. He said that everything was fine. We had been in an accident, but we were lucky because we were almost unharmed. I exhaled. Then I asked where our dad was. Bruce said he was fine. He's just in the other room. But then I remembered their fight and said, "We crashed because he distracted you, right?" This question made my brother think for a moment. Then he said, "Listen, Chris, the police came. They asked about the incident, and I told them that our father was driving, not me. Then my brother said that he might have had a problem with it, but that it would be better for us all if the police thought that my father was driving. Maybe he will be forced into rehab or something." There was something strange about this proposal, but I believed my brother and decided to support him. After this conversation, Bruce was relieved. He said we could go home in the morning and that I needed to sleep. But I couldn't sleep. I was worried I'd have to lie, and I tried to calm myself down. I wanted water, and I couldn't find it in my room, so I went out into the hallway. I have to say, hospital corridors at night look just like they do in horror movies, and you don't expect anything good from them. I kept looking for someone to ask for water, but there was no one around. I walked down the hall to the end, and when I turned the corner, I saw a little girl crying at the entrance to someone's room. I went to her to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop crying. I asked her what happened. She said that her dad was biking home from work and had got hit by a car, and now he's in a coma. I figured out that it was us right away. We were the ones that hit him. What's more, my brother was driving, and he's trying to hide it. This changed everything. It was not just an accident, this was a crime, and Bruce was trying to get our father set up. Yeah, he's a drunk, and my brother was only driving because of him, but he's not guilty. I ran back to the room and woke Bruce up. I started yelling, "Bruce, we didn't just have an accident, you hit a man! Dad is going to jail, do you understand? You have to confess everything!" I started arguing with my brother. He said, "You don't want me to go to jail. I know it's bad, but think about it. Who's going to take care of you? Dad?" Then I said that it didn't matter. A little girl was sitting in the hallway and had no idea whether her father would survive or not. And it was because of Bruce. It was a very difficult choice. One of my loved ones would be in prison, and I had to choose who it would be. And it's not a choice between right and wrong. But I had already made up my mind when I saw that girl. The truth can be unpleasant and painful, but I didn't want to make a deal with my conscience. So I had to find Dad and call the cops and tell them everything. When I went to the entrance, I saw Dad being let out by 2 policemen. I ran up to him and wanted to tell him everything, but my father stopped me. He asked the officers for a few minutes to talk to me, in private. He told me to keep it a secret that Bruce was driving. It turned stop him, but he made that decision on his own. It looks like he really felt guilty about it. He was taken away, so now it's just my brother and me. A few weeks later, we were allowed to see our dad. He apologized to us for the past 3 years. He said he lied to the police because it would be better for both of us, and Bruce can really take care of me. Later, we found out that the cyclist had started to recover and will be fine. It does not absolve us of guilt, but I am very happy that this little girl will have her father back. Then there was a trial and Dad went to prison. It's sad, but he gave us a chance to move on with our lives. And we can't just lose it. We're both very grateful to our dad. I can't even imagine how my brother feels right now, but he's trying his best to justify Dad's sacrifice. And I learned an important lesson. The right choice is not always good or easy, and you have to do everything to make sure your loved ones are safe.